everyone. Welcome back to the Neurodiverging podcast. I'm Danielle Sullivan. I'm a certified life coach and autistic parent and your host. I'm so excited you're here with me today. Thank you for joining us. If you've been a longtime listener, you know that I have a daughter with ADHD and a co-parent with ADHD, and many autistics are co-diagnosed with ADHD. It's something like half of all autistics are also ADHD. And obviously, ADHD also occurs by itself outside of autism and is very common in the United States population. But there are several types of ADHD, including inattentive, hyperactive, and then combined type, which is both hyperactive and inattentive. And inattentive ADHD is very underdiagnosed overall. It's the most common type of ADHD by far in women, but it's also underdiagnosed in a lot of men. And today's guest is an expert on inattentive ADHD. We are talking about his experience with late identified inattentive ADHD. I am so excited to welcome Coach Aron Croft to the podcast today. Aron Croft is a late identified inattentive ADHDer turned popular ADHD coach, and he's the founder of Hidden ADD. He is on a mission to raise awareness about inattentive ADHD, how it goes under the radar, and how to rebuild your life post-diagnosis. His work has been featured by Attitude Magazine, the Attention Deficit Disorder Association, and more, and you may have seen some of his very popular ADHD videos on TikTok. Inattentive ADHD is massively underdiagnosed, especially in men, so I am really grateful to Aron for coming on the show to share his experience. Today we're discussing what it was like for Aron as a child growing up with undiagnosed inattentive ADHD, how lacking the knowledge about his neurotype affected Aron's life in college and young adulthood, and how his life has changed since his diagnosis. Before I introduce Aron, I'd like to thank all of my patrons for supporting this episode of Neurodiverging. I hope you are enjoying everything that's coming out this month. We have lots of seminars and lots of new blog posts on the way. Patrons receive exclusive access to lots of goodies, including access to my back catalog of recorded neurodiversity-related webinars, self-help and coaching downloads, a 15% discount on my course, Autistic Emotions Explained, and much more. If you want to be one of these amazing folks and support Neurodiverging and get all your goodies, please check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/neurodiverging. And now let's get ready to learn everything we need to know about one of the most underdiagnosed neurodivergences. Let's welcome Coach Aron Croft. Hello, Aron, and welcome to Neurodiverging. It's so great to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm doing so well, Danielle, and thank you for having me, and thanks to your awesome listeners for tuning in and for learning about this important topic.
It is such an important topic, and I'm so pleased that you reached out and to have you here today. So you, I know you do a lot of different things, but your focus is inattentive ADHD, and you're a pretty late identified ADDer, right? When were you diagnosed?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed at 34 years old after I'd failed out of 7 jobs and basically ended up broke, divorced, and earning minimum wage. So it took a fair bit of external warning signs to finally come around to the diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of us, I'm late diagnosed autistic, which is obviously different than ADD, but a lot of us are caught so late and have been through so much just to get to mid-30s. It's an unfortunately common story, isn't it? What did your childhood look like? Knowing that you have ADD now, were there kind of signs that got missed when you were younger?
Oh my goodness. I mean, so many signs. I was blessed with some natural intelligence. I was a naturally good test taker. I had like strong social support. Like my friends were all, really smart and motivated, and I had older sisters. So I did well in school, but behind the scenes at home, it was a disaster. So my doing well in school was comprised of massive amounts of procrastination, getting through middle school and high school with pretty much never reading a book cover to cover. My nickname became Cliff's Notes Aron. It was I would be doing homework outside of class, like just regularly. It was always the last minute kind of, I need this like deadline panic to get my brain to kick in gear, which is a thing with ADHD. And, it was a lot of stress and a lot of pain. And, that was compounded by my mom, looking at it, and the perception from the outside is lazy, don't care, or just willfully disobedient. And none of those were the case for me, but I didn't have a better explanation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So this was occurring for you very young, even that you were dealing with this kind of anxiety around meeting obligations or meeting expectations.
100%. I mean, I got the award from my third grade teacher. She gave awards out, and she gave me an award for the best at getting around doing work.
Oh my gosh. That's not great. Yeah. Okay. And then you had a really hard time. You mentioned it a little bit before you were finally diagnosed. You went through all those jobs and businesses not working, and you had trouble at college, right? Can you pinpoint what was going on there and why were you failing at those jobs?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, Danielle. So the thing that I've noticed with inattentive ADHD, both through my research and work, so I have a master's degree in coaching psychology, and I coach ADHDers, but a lot of them tend to have this inattentive presentation, which if you ask 50 people on the street, what's the first thing you think of when you think of ADHD? They're going to picture like 5-year-old boys, painting on the walls, jumping around hyper on sugar. Or they're going to picture like that dog from Up going squirrel, squirrel. With those of us with the inattentive presentation, our experience is very different. So one of the things is that there's a gap, and I see this with a lot of my clients that I coach, that wanting to do something and being able to get your brain to focus on what you want to do, like the connection there has faulty wiring. I've explained it sometimes to people like, a lamp that's plugged into the wall, and, you might flip the switch, but if there's a gap in the wiring between the lamp and the outlet in the wall, it might not turn on even though you flip the switch. And so, for neurotypical people, when you want to work on something that's important to you because you genuinely care and you want to and you're motivated to, but like you can flip the switch and get yourself to focus on it. With ADHD, and specifically inattentive ADHD, you don't have that. And so here's what happens. All that backstory is just to explain why I failed so much and what the real cause was. So here's what does work. What does work is panic.
All the energy you get from that last minute.
Yeah. That urgency and panic of something really bad is going to happen, and there's a really tight deadline and all that. And then all of a sudden, like you flip the switch and the light turns on and you can focus. Here's the problem, Danielle. That gets really tiring over time, both physically, but also mentally and emotionally. And I was able to pull off amazing feats in high school through doing this. And, that's how I got into Harvard, with my test taking skills and with just a lot of these last minute saves. But, it wasn't sustainable. And so when I got to Harvard, I said, I'm done. Like, I don't want to drag myself through the pain of needing to have the fear of God put in me to get work done and to be so stressed out that my brain turns on. And so I just said, I'm going to try not doing that. Except there's a problem with that strategy, was that then my life still sucked. It just sucked in a different way.
As an inattentive ADHDer, do you have a sense as to what the difference is? I know you don't have the hyperactive type, but like you said, it's the kind of stereotyped that is what people think of. Do you have a sense of what the difference is in actual kind of interior life and in how you think about the world and how you approach the world and what's going on for you compared to folks with the kind of hyperactive presentation of ADHD? Does that
Sure.
question make any sense?
Yeah, no, the question makes perfect sense,
Good.
and I tracked it fully. So the primary difference that I've seen, a few differences. But the primary difference I've seen comes around really the energy levels. So at the hyperactive side, one of the diagnostic criteria basically, says like acts as if driven by a motor.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh, that's interesting.
and so what you end up with the hyperactive impulsive side is that you'll get this surplus of energy, and that translates to things that, sometimes can be super helpful, right? Like, yes, the person might not be able to stay focused on one thing for very long because they're just, going so fast. But if you can sustain, I had a client who, I said, and she agreed, like that she gets work done at an Olympic level. I've never seen somebody who does as many things in a day as she does.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've even seen researcher reports about entrepreneurship in ADHD, and they really say that the hyperactive impulsive side is kind of the core of, when people say that ADHD really lends itself well to entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
They have this high energy, which, is great leadership because it's passionate and they can just flip between a bunch of different projects. And then the second part of, the second main difference between the hyperactive impulsive experience and the inattentive experience is really the impulsivity. And, a lot of the inattentive ADHDers tend to be a little bit more reserved, a little quieter, maybe even a little more passive or passive aggressive. And whereas, the other experience on the ADHD is, someone that just overshares and can't stop talking and will interrupt, before you even finish your question because they just can't wait to talk. And, but that translates to entrepreneurship and other things as like risk taking and like willingness to take risks where others won't. So that's some of the differences.
Okay, thank you. So what society would see as the positive, quote unquote, aspects of ADHD, like that risk taking, like the positive risk taking of an entrepreneur, are not always present in inattentive ADHD. So you get the unfortunate, like lazy, unmotivated sort of adjectives, as opposed to the kind of positive, like highly energetic, tries new things sort of
Yeah.
adjectives.
It was really weird, Danielle. So, so I only, formally went full time on my hidden ADHD business in
Mm-hmm.
July. So I don't know, call that at the time that we're recording this, 4 or 5 months ago.
Pretty recently. Yeah.
And I left a multiple 6-figure corporate job and this whole thing. But here's the funny part. So I started making myself available for coaching with clients. And I'm not doing very much one-on-one coaching anymore because I've transitioned to a lot of group programs. One, because I can do it more affordably for people, but two, because it's actually better from a group standpoint to have more than just a coach. You get success teams and peers and such. But I digress. So what I noticed, it was so weird, Danielle, like I noticed that almost like 90% of the clients that came to me, it was literally for the exact same thing. I could summarize their story in probably one sentence. And it struck me as very odd because I figured I was going to get this whole range of different goals and problems.
Mm-hmm.
And it all came down in almost every case, like 90% plus of cases, to the same one problem. I have this thing I want to do. I can't freaking get myself to do it.
Mm-hmm. And what's going on there for them?
What I've really found with myself and then, taught to hundreds of people now, but is that most ADHDers, especially the inattentive presentation, everything becomes a you problem.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've often taught them, and they discover for themselves, is that it's actually not a you problem, it's a system or a strategy problem.
Mm-hmm.
So what do I mean by that? Well, if we go back to the lamp example, right? Mm-hmm. So you flip the switch, motivation's on, it should translate to the ability to take action, right? But in the ADHD brain, there's impairments in the motivation pathways, and the neuroscience differs by individual and such, but that's a common characteristic that they don't have the activation energy to move on tasks that they want to move on. And so a lot of the work I do with them is really teaching them strategies and helping them implement strategies that take a different path to light the light bulb of motivation and action in their brain. And when I say that it's a system or a strategy problem, like think about it, Danielle. The neurotypical or the majority approach that you'll read in self-help or in productivity, or you study these things online, or you listen to popular bloggers or YouTubers or anything, they're going to say that like, you just need to, put more electricity, put more effort and desire through the wire, or you just need to have a better plan, or a better defined goal. But like the normal connection pathway just has impairments. And so a lot of it comes down to strategies to build a alternate pathway to get the same action and result.
That makes a lot of sense. So learning to bypass the faulty wire and finding the other wires that can work instead.
100%, right? And like you really commented on it before, like kind of that self-shaming. Part of the problem with the self-shaming is like we try to put more electricity through the wire and the light bulb still doesn't turn on. And like we try to keep using this and it doesn't work. And then we're like, oh, I'm a failure. I do this, I do that. And, I hear that from all my clients too. And it's so demoralizing, to see that so many people are suffering in silence when it's not that hard to get around it.
Once you have the tools, for sure. Yeah. And so many, I assume this is the case for a lot of autistics, a lot of us who weren't identified in childhood are then not identified till we're well into our adulthood, in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s and up. And I assume that for inattentive ADHDers, that is a similar issue, that you've had so much time to build up this cycle of things not working and failing, similar to what you went through, that by the time you are finally taught that there are strategies for just bypassing the faulty wire completely, that you've just been struggling for such a long time that it's almost part of it. Just must be so hard to change your perception of yourself that quickly as someone who could do things if you had the right strategy.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest challenges and also one of the biggest opportunities. And it also then harks to another misconception in our society, which is that confidence leads to better action. And in fact, the reverse is actually the case, that action leads to confidence. And so we look and we're like, I'm not confident and therefore I don't feel like it and I can't do it. Whereas, one of the things that I work with people on is we build small wins every day, but it's consistency. Nir Eyal has a quote that he taught me, the author of Indistractable and Hooked and others, which is consistency over intensity.
Yeah, for sure.
So many people try to sprint and then they just fall down. Whereas if you can just win a little bit every single day, you start to change that self-image such that you start to rewrite the I'm a failure, I can't do anything stuff that you so well mentioned.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to go back a little bit because I know that you had a lot of difficulty before you were identified. And it seemed to me that when you were in your bachelor's degree program, that you had a lot of trouble. You fell out a couple of times, you re-enrolled. But then later you went back and you did a master's, which is challenging and not nothing.
talking about how I could have dropped out of college twice before barely graduating, and then how I could go from that and then complete a master's in my 30s. So here's a little bit about what happened. And this is it's a challenging one, so I don't want to portray this as a silver bullet because there's a lot of nuance here. But one of the pathways to light up the light bulb through a different pathway is just through intrinsic interests. Where those come from, who knows? But I have always just been obsessed, just so interested and fascinated by psychology, personal development, goals, motivation, the process of change. And, when I went to university, I told my parents that I wanted to major in psychology. And my mom, bless her heart, grew up and she went to college in the, 70s, late 60s, early 70s. And she said, people with psychology degrees just blame their parents and they don't get jobs unless they go on to do a doctorate. So she said, you gotta do a real major. And so, being a little bit passive, which again, a lot of inattentive ADHDers can be a little bit more passive. I just said, okay, I'll just go along with it. And then but my intrinsic desire to understand what makes people tick, and probably if we're being honest, what makes me tick, right? It's sort of, I'm trying to figure out this puzzle that is, Aron, how, that makes no sense, Danielle. How can I want desperately to do something and be unable to get myself to do it? How many Arons are there in this equation? And so I always wanted to understand it. So that was for me one way that I could engage, but I hadn't been diagnosed at that point. Yeah, it was just pure interest and desire, where I could tap into more of that focus, just because it was a topic that I really wanted to understand.
Yeah. So that energy was there because of your interest in it.
So undergraduate, I ended up doing computer science because my mom said, don't do psychology. So the master's was the one where I was able to focus because that was what I cared about. So it was a master's degree in coaching psychology. It was about the science of motivation and goals and change and peak performance. So I was super interested.
For sure.
So yes, I used that for my master's, but I didn't have that excitement for my undergraduate.
Okay, cool. Would it be okay? Could we talk about medication?
Sure.
I know a lot of folks, or I talk to a lot of folks anyway, who are worried about, who think, oh, okay, if I go and get diagnosed with ADD myself, or if I think I have it, if I go get the diagnosis, or if I bring my child to go get the diagnosis, they're just going to medicate them. And some people are medication resistant. And I wondered if we could talk about your experience about it, especially as somebody who's worked with a lot of other ADHDers. I know there are treatments besides medication. What do you think about kind of the treatments for ADHD you've tried, and what has been most helpful for you?
Firstly, I mean, I didn't know until I was an adult in my 30s. And so I feel like the answer definitely would differ between parents and kids.
Oh yes, if you had a 5-year-old.
Between adults and kids. So look, here's three things that I'll say about the decision around kids. One, your neuroplasticity is highest. Your brain's ability to grow and change is highest, and it sort of tapers off by the time you hit 25 years old. So, but certainly at a younger age, the ability for the brain to grow and change is very high.
Yes, for sure.
So I think there's an opportunity there, and whatever the mechanisms are, that parents are interested in, there's not a ton of, and there's not really solid scientific evidentiary support for a lot of interventions. But the most solid science is around the medication and the effect sizes. And, Dr. Russell Barkley says ADHD is the most treatable disorder in psychiatry because, 70+% of people respond well to medication. It has really high effect sizes.
Yeah.
Sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, and just that we've had most of those medications. I mean, some of them are newer, but the stimulant medications we've had for such a long time that there's so much good research on them now.
There's so much good research. And, if you think about all the medications in our lifetime, that have been recalled and pulled off shelves, whether it was Vioxx or whether it was, like these things that cause these health issues that came out, if there were these really bad long-term effects from these drugs, the FDA, these things would get addressed and pulled off the table. There's not a massive profit incentive. They're out of, they're in generic phases. Yeah. Exactly. So, if there was something to really get on these drugs, like a lot of it would have come out. It doesn't mean they're perfect. It doesn't mean there aren't issues. So, so that would be number two, is that medication is, at least if you're just looking for evidence-based, there's plenty of studies that just show that it is the best, and that the other interventions don't have nearly the evidence base. But again, back to point one around the neuroplasticity, I don't have anything against experimenting, right? I mean, what if neurofeedback really works for your kid? Or what if an executive function coach? Or what if, certain setups really help? So then the third thing I would say about kids, so I'm going to say four things. The third thing I would say is that I've encountered, so back to the interest thing. And a related thing to interest is just a sense of autonomy and ownership.
Yes.
And so I've interacted with a lot of people who were given medication as kids, but they didn't feel a part of the decision. They didn't own it. They weren't like, oh, I really want to do X. I really want to get these good grades so that I can get into this space camp, or I really want to, practice whatever. I want to practice the violin so I can play this awesome thing. And I know that I can't focus enough to practice. Like, if they have a motivation, they're like, Mom, Dad, I want some help doing this. I can't do it. It's frustrating. And they feel like they've been involved in the decision. Great. And they have the ability to make changes when it's not working. But I've talked to a lot of adults who felt that they were just kind of forced to take the medication.
Yeah, that's a big problem.
Like, almost like, let's medicate this kid to make them just do what we want them to do and make them more compliant. And then you end up with sort of this kickback effect where they say, oh, it didn't feel good and I didn't like it. I didn't like how it made me feel. And then they'll issue medication until they end up with problems in their 20s or 30s when they're having career failures or relationship failures. And they realize, I guess all those things I can't follow through on, maybe those are that ADHD thing that I kind of intentionally threw off and said, I don't want to deal with this. And so the fourth thing I want to say is, look, I mean, the decision on medicating is challenging. And so I'm all for at the adolescent child level, experimenting. If it works, try other things. What's the harm? And then, going to medication as a fallback. Except here's the one case that I want to offer where I wouldn't offer that approach is sometimes, if the ability to even follow through on the alternative approaches, the ability to just, keep up remotely in school, or keep up with neurofeedback, or keep up with these things they're doing. Like, if you can't follow through on that sometimes medication can be a bridge that enables one to do things that can then make the medication less needed.
Yes.
And so there can be kind of a yes and approach there.
So sometimes you will want to consider accepting medication as a treatment for a period of time, but that doesn't mean you're committing to it for the rest of your adult life.
Well, I mean, at this point, I'm talking about kids, and especially when you have the neuroplasticity, right? It doesn't mean, at the rate that your brain can grow and change. And I mean, adults still have
Oh, for
neuroplasticity.
sure.
It's just the rate of it declines.
Yeah.
But at that level, the kid and teenager, maybe they just develop the neural pathways to really short circuit the kind of broken wire to the motivation light bulb.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, cool, I don't need that medication anymore.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. That's really helpful. Do you have any advice that you would give to young adults, young ADHDers, having gone through what you've gone through?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do have advice. I think, of course, the challenge at that age that we've all experienced from having been that age is that we're not necessarily open to advice, but I'll share the advice anyhow. Part of this goes into the fact that you still have that high levels of neuroplasticity until you're 25. And I think there's a lot of value in taking advantage of those.
Mm-hmm.
You can make changes in your life much more easily. So what I would recommend is if you can find programs that are dedicated to helping ADHDers with your types of symptoms. And again, I can't really comment on the hyperactive impulsive side because I don't pretend to know something where I don't have experience or that I've really worked with a lot of people. With the inattentive people that I've worked with and in the group programs, when they discover that there's ADHD specific ways to kind of short circuit and get the light bulb to turn on, and they discover that they can be consistently productive, like day in, day out. And if you could do that as a teenager or a college kid or a young adult starting your career, one, build the habit while your brain is still super plastic, and two, not build the baggage that you talked about, Danielle, of years of failure and self-shaming. It would open up your life. It would change so many things, and you would really avoid a lot of the baggage. Because it really does come down to a system and a strategy, not a personal problem. Because so many ADHDers have so much potential. It's just trapped inside of them because they don't know how to get the light bulb to turn on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. To wrap up, could you tell us a little bit about where folks can find and learn more about you and your courses and your coaching?
Sure. I would just Google hidden ADHD, and the name of the business just comes to the fact that with inattentive ADHD, it often remains hidden. It goes under the wire, kind of like you talked about, Danielle.
For sure.
With the late diagnosis autism, and that's really it. I've got over 100,000 TikTok followers. So if you just kind of want some funny videos on there,
some of them are really good.
Thank you. See a 40-year-old bald dude dancing and doing weird stuff. You could check that out. I've got some, more detailed full-length YouTube videos where I break down a lot of the strategies for success. And of course, if you Google hidden ADHD, you'll come across website, and I've got a 45-day challenge to crush procrastination and overwhelm through basically developing a productivity habit. And so we've got lots of things. Check it out. We got some free guides on ADHD 101 if you're just getting started. So lots of cool stuff.
There's some really great resources there. So I'm going to put some links in the show notes below. So please go check them out. Thanks so much for being here today, Aron.
Thank you, Danielle. It was an absolute pleasure. And thanks for the work that you're doing with this community. I think it's so important. And again, thanks to the listeners for, there's a lot of things that they could be doing other than learning about this important topic and trying to better their kids' lives, their own lives. So just hats off to them as well.
Yeah. We all appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much for joining me on the Neurodiverging podcast today. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please consider leaving a rating on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or anywhere else you review podcasts. It really helps us out. More information about Aron Croft and hidden ADHD is in our show notes and also at neurodiverging.com, so please check those out. Aron has a lot of great free resources for ADHDers that are really helpful. Thank you again so much to my patrons for supporting this podcast and everything we do at Neurodiverging. You are all amazing and I really appreciate it. Please join us for more at patreon.com/neurodiverging. I hope to see you there. Please remember, we are all in this together.